So welcome back from break. Thank you all for being here again. I can't say this myself because I spoke, but I think we had a good morning. What the heck, I'll pat myself on the back. Thanks to Bill and thanks to Raj and Michael and David. I just love the sort of the tussle on the sort of the engineering side and the design side. And I think that's exactly what we're trying to provoke here, sort of, not actually provoke fights, but sort of get a dialogue going about sort of why some of this stuff is so hard to do, but what the opportunity might be. So with that, let me welcome the panel. We've already, as you know, at Road to Reinvention, we don't spend time on introductions because these people are prominent enough as they are, and so we've rolled sort of their bios on the screen. But I just want to thank them personally because they are all very busy executives and they've taken time to spend the day with us, and we have amazing companies represented, Taco Bell, Anthem, and Target. And so thank you all, and let's get going. So you know, we've been doing research on digital transformation at the center for the last 4 years, and you know, I won't bore you with sort of the findings that we've had over the years, and you'll see them in various slides throughout the day. But the one finding that comes out in every single study that we do is the role of senior leadership in digital transformation. We heard it from Bill Rear this morning. You know, we're talking about Jeff Immelt and his role at GE. And so, Brian, I'm just going to go right to you. You're a CEO. How do you see sort of digital transformation from your vantage point as the CEO of Taco Bell? And then what do you expect the role of your board to be in leading the move to a digital world?
Yeah, sure. So, well, I think you're right. If the senior leaders don't have a mindset to want to adopt, you know, the new ways of doing business, it'll stall out real quickly because the legacy, you know, legacy work has unbelievable gravity, right? And, you know, what I've found is you have to be comfortable with being a bit of a pioneer, and then you also have to be comfortable with establishing a vision that maybe some people may think you're a little bit ahead of the curve. But what I have found is in dealing with our board, you know, most people resonate to a simple vision that demonstrates that it can really change the way you do business and the way you ultimately interact with your customers and your employees. And when that's clarified, people are willing to learn forward with you, or you know, see if there's opportunities to continue to grow. And what we've seen is over and over again, that's what we've done at Taco Bell. And frankly, the companies I admire most are the ones that I think are comfortable with the idea of failing in the space, and then quickly taking those learnings, taking those insights, and turning them into action to move them forward. You know, so it's kind of one step back, but then you get like 4 steps forward. And I think when you get across that vision, the board will support you, and you know what, the people in the middle of the company will really support you. I know we talk about getting the board to support you, but it's really easy for me to get my leadership team and my direct reports on board, and it's not as hard, frankly, to get the board on board, but you need the middle of the organization to embrace the idea of it's okay to fail with the intent of making big leaps forward.
Great. So let's turn to the board perspective. Roxanne, you know, you're a board member and you're a past CEO. You know, you've been one of the most prominent retailers now for a while. What's it like for you being on the board, and how do you see the role of the CEO in leading this move to a digital world?
Well, I think the CEO is absolutely critical, because when a CEO isn't on board with a digital transformation, you can see the devastating consequences that it can have in a company. And I've experienced that in the past, where we've had situations where, you know, the CEO didn't embrace the world changing as rapidly as it was changing, didn't make the kind of investment that needed to be made, and so you have to play catch up, and that's a very expensive and also costly from a company reputation standpoint, from the employee standpoint, morale standpoint. So I think really embracing, having a CEO, and quite frankly, a CFO who isn't just running this, you know, this is a return on investment analysis, because quite frankly, some of these digital investments, as you guys probably all know, are not just an ROI-based decision. You've got to base a decision based on where the world is moving and not getting behind. And so I think having a CFO and a CEO on board with where the company, where strategically you're moving and where the industry is moving, and really understanding where your external environment, what's occurring there. and not just putting your head in the sand and saying, we're just worried about our business and what our day-to-day work that we're doing today. So I think the CEO and the CFO are critical here, in my view.
Target has actually made great strides forward since. So last year, I actually talked about Target because it was right after the layoffs. But it was also at the same time as the recommitment to digital. I think they upped the ante by spending, if I remember correctly, a couple of billion, or at least announced publicly that they would spend a couple of billion dollars. So from what I can tell, you're well on your way to sort of being where you would have liked to be. So can you talk a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think the journey was tough. You know, the board, we had a management change in 2014. And the board coalesced around the idea that we had to have a leader for the future that really embraced the digital revolution that had occurred in retail and that we were behind on at Target, and had to really be a person that could drive that vision through the organization and make it happen quickly, but also without alienating our customer. In fact, with embracing our customer and bringing those technologies to our customer more directly. So we really focused initially on mobile, for example, because that was easier to adopt and to get into people's hands and to get our customers' hands, and then working through the rest of the IT system to be able to support the vision that we have. But the entire board had to get behind that vision, and I think that was a critical aspect, because to Brian's point, he says it's easy to get his board on board, but if you're a board and you've got to hire a new person, what are we going to tell this new person we want them to do? We had to be very clear about what Brian Cornell, the person we ultimately hired, what his priorities were going to be, and digital was at the very top of that list, along with a whole host of other things, but that was at the very top. And
so you actually recruited for somebody who could lead the digital transformation effort?
Yeah, we wanted someone that had been through a number of different transformations. So in Brian's past, he had gone through lots of different change management situations where he really had to come into an organization, coalesce the team, and lead them through a change. And he had done that in several different places throughout his career. He had a very broad and diverse background, and we thought that would be the kind of person, first of all, that understood, he got it, what the digital revolution was meaning in retail, and that Target was behind in that regard, and that we had to make a very fast and rapid pace forward. So he was the guy.
Excellent. Julie, let's turn to a very different industry, one that's not exactly renowned, sorry to pick on you, Julie, but I've known Julie for a long time, renowned for leaps in productivity. So tell us from your, where you sit on the board of Anthem, a little bit about Anthem and kind of what your challenges are as a board member and sort of what you expect from your CEO at a company like that.
Thank you, Vijay. So first of all, it dawned on me at some point this morning that I might be the good example of what not to do. I'm not that quick, and I didn't get that actually until I came and sat here for a while and listened. The journey has been very difficult and Margot, please don't quote any of this stuff. But it's been very difficult in the sense that you had a very staid, complacent, risk-averse company, basically health insurance. And the forcing mechanism of the ACA, unfortunately, is what made us understand who our customer really was. We thought our customer was Ford Motor, not the end user. So we didn't have to do the data analytics. We didn't have to do the healthcare analytics. So some of us on the board have been saying for a long time that this was coming, consumerism was coming, transparency was coming, and that we actually had to get up to speed and do that. But I will tell you very honestly that the Affordable Care Act really is what made us think about that in a very different way. We also had a CEO change. I think Roxanne and I bonded in a conversation about having gone through that. It's probably one of the toughest things you do as a board. But there was no uptake, there was no understanding under the last regime where we were moving and where we were changing, and we were losing market share. And we didn't understand that our market share wasn't going to be the Ford Motors of the world anymore. It was going to be the ultimate user of healthcare. So we've been on a journey, and like Optum with United and like Humana that's got a Skunk Works, I think, in Louisville that looks like Palo Alto, and we have one in Atlanta. And we're beginning to start to understand that we have to talk to our customer differently, and therefore we have to understand them differently. And I read a stat the other day that said that, I think McKinsey did this in 2014, that $300 billion could be taken out of the health spend, 8% of our annual health spend, if we could just mine metadata for health outcomes. So for me, that becomes not just a commercial benefit, but I think there's kind of a moral or an ethical imperative. I tend to be the one on our board that says, wait a minute, this is healthcare. Let's think about this differently. So I guess to sum up, I'd say we are on the journey. We're getting there. One of the biggest learnings that we've had is that you can't have an isolated Skunk Works. You can't start chasing shiny objects. You have to integrate that with the line of business. And that's a cultural shift. That's change management. And to get the line of business people to buy into what's being invented over there, I think has been one of the biggest learnings that we've had, and we're getting there.
Actually, let me underscore that point, because one of the reasons we have a panel this afternoon, which is called Ideating, Incubating, and Integrating Digital Innovation, is precisely that. So if you do it in a skunk works or whatever, or an innovation lab, the mothership often has antibodies that fight these innovations off. And so
Hug them to death.
Well, I'd also say, Vijay, that the other thing is that you have to incentivize. So let's use Target as an example. So originally, the stores organization said, well, wait a second, the digital revolution is going to take away from my store revenue. When in fact, it should rise the store revenue, right? If the person's interactive and is actually shopping or researching data before they go into the store, researching what they want to buy, thinking about what they want to buy, or even looking when they're in the store to price shop, quite frankly, to price compare or whatever. Whatever it is, it should be a win-win for the consumer. So getting the incentives right and getting everyone aligned around an incentive that said, we raise the whole boat together, and we're a better company, we're a stronger company, and that was a big deal for us to get all the incentives aligned around that.
Yeah, and you're probably in one of the most competitive spaces there is, right? Because you've got Amazon and Walmart that are extremely sort of efficient at retail, and it's funny to watch. Not funny, but it's like when you look at sort of
maybe funny for you, Vijay.
As a business school professor, a challenging problem for me to work on.
What we say is it's Amazon, Walmart, and a death by 1,000 duck bites, because we have thousands of little retailers and thousands of retailers that are competing in all of our spaces.
Yeah, and there's been papers written in academia on the Walmart effect before
Right.
online, which was sort of how efficient the retail industry had to become because Walmart was so good at what they do. And now, of course, it's Amazon, and we all read about the culture, so we'll leave that discussion for another day.
Yeah.
But it really speaks to kind of how difficult your jobs are, because this is just relentless performance improvement, new sort of frontiers. Brian, let me go back to you. One of the things we heard this morning was, is it strategy, digital transformation, how these two come together? Now, obviously, there needs to be a sort of a broad strategy for the company, and digital is a very big piece of it. But how does the digital roadmap get created, or who should create it? Like, what's your role? What's the CIO's role? What's the chief digital officer's role?
Yeah, we actually talk about this a lot, but I think in the end, the reason why it's an imperative for our business is because two things. One, our customers demand it. And then the second piece is the business model demands it. So when you have those two things being your driving force, I personally believe, and I say this all the time to everybody on our leadership team, it's everybody's responsibility. The last thing I want to have happen is our CMO says the CIO is the reason why, the pipes aren't working correctly for the user experience. Well, that's not okay. In the end, we're accountable because our customer doesn't care what anybody's title is at Taco Bell. What they care about is, I want a frictionless experience with your brand. And from a business model standpoint, we also have to figure out how we drive efficiency while we do it. And so, the thing for us, we've got 7,000 restaurants. So we are pretty convenient already. So you might ask, well, why do you want to do mobile ordering? Why do you want to do mobile payment?
Yeah, why do you?
Well, and every now and then I do get that question asked. But the reality is it's part of culture now. It's as much to be a cultural play, to be a leader in technology, as it is to solve pain points. And for us, if you're under the age of 25, the first place you go to figure out where you're going to eat is one of these devices. Mm-hmm. And I want to be, you may end up not ordering through it because you may just do it to decide, well, what's the new item that Taco Bell has, or what's the new item whoever one of our competitors have. But in the end, you need to have that conversation through the mobile device. And I think it's ultimately everybody's accountability, especially when it comes time to invest, because you're investing. Mobile ordering is less than 1% of our business.
Right.
Okay. Versus when I was at Pizza Hut, mobile ordering now represents 25% of the pizza business. It's $1 billion business. Okay. And just 10 years ago, it was zero. So I firmly believe it's a cultural mandate by the consumer, and I also firmly believe it's a business model mandate because if you fall behind, the price to catch up becomes daunting, and you get stuck because of your inability to act.
But one of the other things that you said at a different speech when you spoke at the business school a little while ago, you talked about Taco Bell being in the culture, in the digital culture. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, obviously we're an experience business. As much as we sell, crunchy tacos and now quesalupas, which, I just like saying it as much as eating it. It is one of those demands that I think brands today, and you probably see this at Target, right? The brands today that consumers truly have an affinity for are a part of their culture. And if you are a part of their culture, and I always talk about this, and people sometimes get surprised. I'm like, Taco Bell absolutely has to have relevant food and a food culture that syncs up with today's desire to eat, but we also have to be a brand that's culturally relevant in music and fashion, technology, sports. And most people look at me like, huh? No, you sell dollar crunchy tacos. And I'm like, if all we sell are dollar crunchy tacos, then somebody else can replace me. But if I truly am wired into the culture of how you want to speak, how you want to interact, how you want to badge yourself, and I think technology is one of those critical things of how people badge themselves. The reason people have an Instagram account isn't just because they like to take pictures, okay? The reason why they have an Instagram account is because they want to showcase what their lifestyle is all about. And who they are, what they believe, what they want to change, what they want to impact. It's the same, I think it's the same with the brands that they choose to then post in their Instagram account. They think it's a reflection then of their lifestyle, their ethos, their personal values. And, I think brands that get in trouble are the brands that fall out of culture.
So Brian, I think you just gave me the answer I've been looking for the last 3 months.
What's that?
Which is, why do we now have a taco emoji? And I think you were the person who advocated that.
It is true, because I was getting upset that my kids were sending out burgers and fries, and I wanted a taco emoji. I don't think that's too much to ask.
I don't think, I'm the Taco Bell professor, what am I going to say?
Yeah, that's right. If you haven't used your taco emoji, please do.
But I do want to digress for a minute, because I think this one is really funny, Roxanne. It's like, this is the new battleground for language, whether we have an emoji or not, because it has become such an integral part of the culture. I mean, which one of us, regardless of age, has not used emojis in texting, right? I mean, it just speaks to our new, sort of the new letters of the alphabet, if you will. Yeah. Julie, let me turn to you, because, given sort of the way you described Anthem, and many of us here interact with Anthem, how do you move a company forward? I mean, one thing we talked about already was hiring sort of new leadership, but more broadly, so how do you build the digital capabilities within a company like Anthem? Bill talked about sort of the digital DNA and these two sort of different DNAs going on at the same time until we can actually truly build, in his case, a digital industrial company. So what do you do to push this agenda forward, you and the board sort of more broadly?
I'm just sitting here trying to figure out what our emoji would be. I'd like to take some suggestions later, be kind of an audience participation.
Person with a bandage around his head would be my
I don't want to hurt your feelings, but we probably won't use it that much.
Or they'll use it too much.
Yeah,
too much. Backing up a little bit, one of the things that I don't think is talked about a lot in Fortune 50, Fortune 500 companies is, I'm going to say it, generational gap on a board. You have a lot of gray-haired people who sit on boards, who didn't grow up, who are not digital natives, who really don't, they're beginning to adapt it. But I can tell you some horror stories. I was on a board based in Australia. The chairman got up at an international company, prominent, built everything from bridges to shopping centers and so forth, and literally got up at an AGM, annual general meeting, and said, when something went wrong on one of his slides, he said, I'd hoped to get through my entire career without having to use email. I mean, that's true. That's a true story. And then more recently, on another board that I'm on, someone said to me, I just found out I have cookies on my computer. What do I do? And I said, oh my God. So anecdotes to tell you about the generational divide. So you don't necessarily have people on a board who are listening. I'm lucky. I have a son. I have friends like Alex Bard. I have people who keep me up to date. I like to read Wired magazine. I like to read Fast Company. I'm curious. And so what I understand this to be is a huge innovation shift. Digital is enabling transformation and innovation in a way that's never happened before. I get that. I also get cultural change. I'm also curious. I'm also competitive, and I want our company to do really well. So those were the driving forces for me. And I happen to be one on the board that has been saying for some time there will be a consumer revolution. We're an amalgamated company. We're 14 Blue Cross plans that all rolled up together. As of, this is probably inside baseball, but as of about a year and a half ago, we still operated on 7 different platforms, which means you can't roll out a national product without going through just horrible gyrations, much less start to really understand who our consumer is. So I think the best way that I could do this, somebody earlier said coalition of the willing. We have a few new board members, and they were very willing to get behind this and to understand that we needed new leadership. We needed people who understood this. As Roxanne said, you have to have the strategy in mind and know where your business is going. Otherwise, digital doesn't make any sense. It's an enabler. So when we finally understood that our business was going to become very consumer-centric, that spend on IT became easier to sell. And it became easier to sell when you put metrics around performance on business line leaders that actually targeted their adaptation, their timed adaptation.
So Roxanne, at Target or other companies you've been at, one of the things we've learned about digital initiatives is, some people customers sometimes often benefit, but within the company, you see sort of the power structures moving. There's winners, you sort of alluded to it, like, do stores believe they're going to win or lose? I actually worked with a company where the people who controlled inventory would not release it to the online channels because they thought, they actually physically just would not release inventory. I don't think that would happen anymore. So, you're watching sort of business units that may be cannibalized. There's more extreme cases where, you sort of bet on the online channel and you give up on the physical world channel, shifting power structures. How do you sort of manage this shift?
Well, again, I think it's incentivizing everyone for raising the boat, right? And what
does that mean, though?
Well, it means Target will not grow as a company. Abbott, AbbVie, others will not grow unless they are relevant, right? I'm on the board, by the way, of Abbott and AbbVie, 2 healthcare companies and a couple of technology companies. In every single case, on every single one of these companies, everyone's looking at how do we grow and how to become relevant, and digital is increasingly more of the conversation every day in every boardroom that I'm in. And so what we've said to people is, look, we're going to have a football team, and not everybody can be the quarterback, right? And so some people are going to play different positions throughout the course of this. We're going to make sure that we incentivize all of us for the team goal of what the scoreboard says, not what the individual players do. Who has the ball the longest, or who has the ball to take it the furthest? But every one of us are trying to raise the boat. So I think, how you communicate the importance. It's not winners and losers. It's how the organization performs and how you communicate that, how you incentivize that, I think is what's critically important.
Yeah, in a lot of the organizations where they actually struggle, unfortunately, people do see like, okay, I'm ceding some of my territory to somebody else. And I think that's what you're talking about, which is if you can sort of raise, if rising tide lifts all boats, which in this case means all the sort of the managers in the company, that is part of the solution, which is why, so one of the things I alluded to this morning about the Netflix culture, which I think is, it's a lot of this is about talent management, I would suspect, getting the right people at the right positions.
And that's totally right. If you don't have the right people in the right positions, and people are not on board with this change, then you need to change people, and you need to change them quickly, I think, because the longer you wait, the longer, things won't happen that need to happen, right?
Which begs the question of great HR people, because at the same time that you're trying to make this change, you're getting people who, by definition, are going to be losing their jobs. And so, morale is a very hard thing to define, but the culture within a company has to be that we believe that this is the future. We all understand that where we're going. And I've seen HR people miserably fail in doing that.
Yeah, one of the things I've seen in companies that I think win are ones that have a culture that are excited about seeing what's around the corner.
Right.
If you have a culture that only wants to celebrate what's happened in the past and they can't get excited about what's around the corner, you're going to have a problem.
And we're going to have more market transitions
that's exactly
than ever,
what,
right?
What we know right now, for sure, is it's going to change. So it's like, you better be comfortable with the idea of taking a peek around the corner and then asking the question, who's capable, who isn't, and how do we resource the culture accordingly?
Well, and I think people understanding that that's never going to, like, change is
Right,
never
it's
going to
never gonna
end,
stop.
right?
That's right.
And so I was at Target last week giving a talk with Brian Cornell, actually, and we were talking about transformation and what the company was going through, and we were having this conversation like we're having today. And one of the things Brian said to me was, well, can you tell the team, because he set me up for this question, when is it going to be over? I said, it's never going to be over, because we're going to have to continue to innovate, continue to be the best, continue to strive. There's someone over there right now trying to figure out how to take business away from us in every single category that we're in. And so change is, in digital change in particular, is just going to, exponentially increase. It's not going to get, so we just got to get on board. And you got to have people with that mindset. That's exciting. That's
it's got to energize them.
You got to energize them, not say, I don't want to be a part of that.
And if it's over, that's actually really bad, because
Well,
then we're
exactly.
not growing.
Yeah. The way I say it's only over is when you're unfortunately 6 feet under.
Or you don't know it's over, but it's
Yeah,
over.
right. Or
You need a health insurance policy.
Yeah. You need the health
or
insurance
life
below-
insurance policy. Life insurance policy. I didn't know this was going to go morbid.
You can sell tacos, I sell health insurance.
And I'll sell you anything.
Maybe you should be.
Good one.
Sounds like we
good.
should be aggregators.
But you guys just sold your pharmacy business to CBS.
Yes.
We did that, and the reason for that was because of scale. The pharmacy business is a scale business today. There's large contracts that are let between the different enterprises, Express Scripts, for example, others, that with these large contracts that are out there and being able to price and be able to be relevant, we didn't feel like our size could be relevant.
And talk about disintermediating. Walgreens is going to vertically integrate.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, so the models that are happening in our industry are just unbelievable, the rate of change. And if you can't get excited about that, if you don't have that in your DNA, then we're not going to make it.
And they're trying to buy Rite Aid, if I remember correctly.
There's a lot going on in that space.
Okay,
Some
so
things I
we'll-
can't talk about.
Okay, we will stay away from that then. So Brian, this is a slightly provocative statement. I spoke to a CEO one time who said he would never invest in a risky digital initiative because it would cost many millions of dollars. The payoffs would accrue after he had left the company or moved to a different position with the company, and a failure would happen on his watch. Now, I recognize that's an extreme statement, but sort of the underlying sentiment is there's a lot of money to be spent. There's a lot of risk associated with the investment. There's unclear priorities. There's uncertain outcomes, and we're all accountable to shareholders.
Yeah.
How do you sort of balance these different pressures and sort of continue to push the company forward?
You shouldn't be doing digital for the sake of doing digital. Okay?
Right.
So you got to have some priorities for why you're doing what you're doing, because you do have to measure the outcomes.
Right.
To know if you're actually making progress. Now, if the outcome isn't one that you expected, then you have to be nimble enough and smart enough to recognize it's maybe time to take a little turn. And I think the mistakes people make is they don't listen to the feedback. And the thing that's great about the digital space is, or not so great, depending on who you are, you get feedback. And that tells you where the next investment actually needs to go and where you can pull back in other areas. So, I'm not sure who said that, but, shame on them. They shouldn't be the leader, because the leader is the one that sets the priorities, sets the agenda, and has to hold yourself accountable for what are the outcomes, and are these the expected outcomes, or are they unexpected outcomes, and then where do you go next? So, that's what I would say. I personally believe, you're being not responsible if you aren't figuring out how you can invest in the future, because that sounds like somebody that's afraid of the future.
And I will tell you one thing that I've seen, and you guys in this room probably have seen this as well, but in large companies, there's a tendency to say, we're just going to continue with what we've got, and it becomes more expensive
Right.
than if you just did it right. If you just started with a clean sheet of paper and said, if I had a perfect environment in this digital space that I'm in today, or in the digital world we're in today, what would I do? It winds up, in many cases, being cheaper than what they're doing today, because they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases on band-aiding systems that are antiquated, that don't do the job that their teams, that need. It's just.
That's actually a great point. One of the questions I love to ask is, what's the cost of doing the old thing?
Right.
And you'll be amazed at what the response is and how many people are actually spending all their time trying to protect the old way of doing it, when in fact, to just invest in the future and maybe get a different outcome, it really is not that scary of an investment, nor both in people or money.
And in
Can we
fact,
just talk, excuse me a second,
Yeah.
just talk about the tension between quarterly reporting and this kind of long
Right.
span investment? Because I think it's something that really is an issue in business, and I think it torpedoes many, many good ideas. It begs the question of going back to HR, having the correct incentives for officers to not make them drive for quarterly reporting for profits. The other thing that I think is interesting is that's something a board member can do, and I'm sure that Roxanne has done the same thing. You can give air cover where sometimes the executives can't, because they've got line people underneath them whose livelihood is depending on that. So at some point in time, a board member has got to step in and say, look, this is broken. This really is broken. It has to be fixed, and we have to suspend this. One of the CFOs I worked with said, but Julie, you're always chasing these shiny little objects. And I said, yeah, but they're my shiny little objects. And I think these are going to work. This is where I would put the bet. And I think that if you don't have somebody doing that has a span of a time frame that's longer than the quarterly reporting, we're never going to get there, because this spend is risky. And you don't know, 50% of it could be wrong. Just one other thing to tag on to is, another thing I think that companies don't do well is they don't do look backs. They don't go back and try to understand why that contract with IBM did X, Y, and Z and didn't do X, Y, and Z. And I think that's another thing that we can enforce as a board member that just says, let's be accountable. But let's also learn from that spend and fail fast.
Roxanne, you were going to.
I was just going to say, we hired a new CIO, at Target within the last year, and he came from Tesco, which Tesco is known to be one of the top digital leaders in retail. And he said, we're spending more money than we need to be spending. We're spending lots of money. We're just not spending it the right way. So it goes back to that prioritization and being very clear about your strategy and your priorities. And the money's there. It's just being willing to, place the bets.
So if the runners could get ready with the mics. So one of the things that's on everybody's mind, and I know that both your companies at Target and Anthem have talked about being hacked, and how do boards, what's been the and obviously the Apple case is like, the newspaper every day. What's sort of the news, what's the role of the board today around cybersecurity? Because, the first time you're sort of forgiven, but it can't happen again.
Well, everybody knows that they've been hacked, right? And what's happening on boards is there's a whole evolution of trying to understand how a board member monitors it. And it's no longer a question of if, it's time to response. So there are metrics being formed. I think Deloitte has done some work on this to try to understand how long until you discovered it, and then how long until you remediated it, and then what was your action plan? Because you've got so many different constituencies at a time. So I think that's it. I haven't seen that in a lot of boards. It's something that I try to talk about because I think it's a way to start to get your hand on it. And I just want to say publicly that any of you who had Blue Cross plans in California do not have a problem with your credit, because the Chinese don't care what your credit card number was. It was a Chinese hack for the Anthem hack. And they literally wanted to, and this is public, so it's okay to say this, they wanted to start their own insurance companies in China. And that's why they took 80 million files. But it wasn't because they want to know whether you had a runny nose or not.
Well, but what I'm seeing is that we're spending a lot more time on board education, thank God, and spending more time on that. What is our governance around when you have a situation, it's time to respond, as Julie said. When you have a situation, how quickly is the board, at what point is the board even informed? At what point is the CEO informed? What is that chain of governance, and how does that work, and how quickly can we respond to a crisis situation? We went through a crisis situation. We lived it real time. We were having daily board calls for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and then I spent a whole summer in Minneapolis with the team.
Better than winter.
Better than winter, which I said, a CEO before the first snow, but luckily that happened in the right way. I would have been there if it didn't. But at any rate, I think it's really around the board being engaged in the whole process of how are we going to deal from a governance standpoint with these types of situations. And we've completely relooked at what we do in every board pretty much that I'm on.
Just a quick thought about that. Typically boards have CFOs and CEOs at their board meetings. I think CIOs have to be present at every board meeting. It has to be as integrated as a CFO is.
Questions from the audience? Go ahead.
So one of the things that I'm wondering about is, do you feel that analytical skills now need to be part of the requirements of a CEO, as well as one other thing that Brian does, which is amazing, is he looks at the data behind the data. He'll go do an informal focus group of moms, for example, to understand what's really going on.
Did you plant that guy?
Are you talking about Target? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Brian Cornell.
So at Target, we actually, Brian, one of the things that we loved about Brian was that he was going behind the data. We were worried about the customer. We didn't understand our customer as well as we needed to understand our customer. And Brian's background was really focused around that. So he just spent time doing in-home, we talked earlier, I think you mentioned it, in-home visits. Brian has just spent the last several weeks going around and actually physically living for 4 hours with a family, a Target family, not knowing who he is or why he's there. I mean, they agreed to do this thing. And then at the end, he tells them he's Brian Cornell, the CEO of Target. But we have learned, we just looked at some of those videos a couple weeks ago in Minneapolis, and we've just learned tremendous insight from that. I think you've really got to be a person that's that curious. You've got to be brutally honest, and I think that's why a CEO that's willing to do that is what's critically important for Target, and I'm sure is what made Brian such a great CEO at Taco Bell.
Because the point behind that is that the analytics are powerful, but it's the synthesis that matters.
That's right.
And the only way you can do the synthesis is if you actually are in touch with your actual customer. That's brilliant. So that's the reality. And I know Brian. He's actually on our board. I always look forward to spending time with him because he has a similar lens on the business, which is the analytics only get you so far. And my point to everybody in our organization is, here's the newsflash. Everybody has the same analytics.
Right.
So the power is actually in those that are intuitive, curious, and capable of synthesis. And I think that's what Brian's demonstrating
exactly
by going behind the data.
Unless you have Bill's analytics. I'll do a plug.
Well, yeah, there's always an exception.
We have a question over there.
Question primarily to Taco Bell and Target, but the other person also can respond. Do you have a social media strategy? If so, what would that be?
Yeah, we do. It's want me to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. We do. It's actually become, it's integrated into our business every day. We have a standing meeting every morning at 9 a.m. where we review anything that's happened overnight, and then we do it again at 3 o'clock so we understand what's happened during the day. And in our case, our social media does multiple things. One, it's about customer care. Another one is in regard to actual cultural relevance. And then another one is in regard to understanding how we're operating. And so, there's these three, I call it like pipelines of information that we monitor, participate in, and use it to inform what we're going to do daily. And I think, one of the mistakes is everybody talks about likes and retweets and so on and so forth. I think you hear about that all the time because that's just how they're monetizing a lot of these things. But the real power for companies is how do you use it so that it's insight-based, you can actually better coordinate and connect with your customer, and then also how do you inform your team of what you'd like them to be working on right now because it's actually important. And, it's hugely powerful. We've got, actually, I don't know if Lynn Hemmons is in here, but there's Lynn. Lynn, we started out with our social media. It was literally, on a little flat screen, and it was a blue line that showed us just conversations. Now we've got, half a floor where not only do you know what's being said, but who then actually listens to what that person said, and if you respond, what the implication is, and so on and so forth. So it's an integrated piece of the puzzle. It's not just a marketing tool.
And we've done the same thing at Target. We have a whole group that's constantly feeding feedback back into the management team, to the leadership team, out into the stores. And Brian gets updates throughout the day, and it's just become part of how we do business.
Great. I'm told there's a question somewhere over there.
Yes, this is for Target. I was with Mike, your CIO, at a conference, the Forbes CIO Summit a few weeks ago, and he had one great quote. He said, "There is no such thing as omnichannel. Omnichannel just is." And I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts on the role, especially of mobile, and how Target can respond to the online, offline, and the risk that showrooming places against you and other competitors?
Well, I mean, we say that the mobile phone is the storefront today. The mobile phone is the first place that the customer enters. They don't walk into a physical space or go up to, they enter through the mobile device. And so that is the storefront. And so we have to, we're not worried about showrooming. In fact, we have apps, we have the capability for the customer to compare pricing. And we're perfectly fine with that. We should be fine with that, by the way, because that's what that's what customers do. So why not enable them to be able to do that? So it absolutely has to be embraced, and we've tried to get that all the way through the organization, that the mobile phone is the storefront, and whether someone actually physically buys on the phone, or whether they're using the phone in the store, or whether they're leaving and tweeting to someone about what they saw in the store, it doesn't matter. It still results in Target being part of that conversation. And so, omni-channel, we don't even use the word anymore because truly mobile is the storefront and that's where we go. And the physical spaces are there either to fulfill or to be available for someone who wants to just quickly run in and get something.
So we have time for one last question. I saw a hand go.
Brian, you commented earlier that digitization isn't just about a bunch of initiatives. You need to have priorities and a strategy. And I wonder for any of you how the CEO and board work together in crafting. Effectively, it's your corporate strategy around digitization, which traditionally happens in that room. How does that differ? And maybe are you involving different people as a result?
Well, what we did at Target when we went through our crisis, 2014, is, and the summer that I spent there, was to really step back and take a critical look at our business. Just say, we're going to assume we know nothing. And we're going to look at every single aspect of our business: brand, customer, competitors, where we are in every single merchandising category. We looked at everything about our business through a brutal lens. And I will tell you, that was tough for our team. We don't have a CEO yet. And what I said to the team during that process was, you are going to know more about your business, so when the new CEO walks in the front door, he or she is going to be able to hit the ground running. We're going to involve everybody in this conversation. So all functional areas were involved at some point. We did 24,000 hours of work and synthesized that out into a report out to the board, and ultimately became the basis around the strategy that Brian and the team put together to go forward with the new vision for Target. But I think you have to start with that sort of brutal honesty and then developing that strategy, and the strategy has to be clear, and it does have to involve all parts of the organization, and everybody has to be bought into it.
Which is pretty much what happened when we tried to adapt to the Affordable Care Act, because everything was shifting. All the dynamics in healthcare were shifting. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the team for being able to figure that out at that time. The good news and the bad news is that Anthem has led on the individual exchanges. And I do want to say that we do have a social media strategy, and it's evolved from just not ever wanting to be mentioned on social media. We have moved forward somewhat, but that organizing mechanism, that forcing event, were a radical shift in our business model. We did have to drive that down through every line of business, and all of the employers who were going to start dumping people on the exchange, we knew nothing about them. How did we start to really understand? And the team, the underwriters, because we write against risk, the underwriters were really, really good in starting to look at what they hadn't before, psychographic data, and start to understand what people really wanted when they signed on to the exchange.
With that, let me close. One of the things that has amazed me about this morning, and actually it's a comparison to last year. Last year, the conversation was much more about how do we convince people to move forward. And this year, the conversation has just completely shifted. It wasn't planned. Where companies are much further ahead, and we heard it this morning already, which is we don't need to convince anymore of the need to move on digital. And more and more companies are doing it on their own. And now the bigger challenge seems to be, how do we do this? And what are all the things we need to do to make this successful? Because we're sure going to spend a lot of money on it. And we all want to be around in the future, Brian. We not on the ground. With that, thank you all for your attention. We have an hour for lunch. We'll see you back here at 10 after 1. Let's thank the panel.